Most of the people we know aren't. But that doubt exists, and there's hierarchies within religious organizations to deal with that doubt.
Yeah. So to go on just with the first part of the discussion there, the first reason, of course, that atheists don't believe in a God is, of course, lack of evidence. And we're often presented with the God of the gaps argument. In this case, scientific explanations have continuously reduced the need to invoke a supernatural explanation for natural phenomena.
That's an interesting one in that there's a lot of theologians who don't really care for God of the gaps as well. It's not just the atheists who don't care for it. And then, because it also leads to weird problems like within the evolution debate, there's no gap there. There used to be a gap there way 200-300 years ago. That gap was filled by evolutionary theory, and now they're trying to pretend that gap is still there, which is where this teach the controversy horse hockey comes from.
Right.
So,
well, and that's just it. Is that it's non-falsifiable. When you say that God supposedly exists out of space and time, there's no way for you to actually prove that or disprove that claim. How could anyone possibly know?
Non-falsifiable is a pretty big word there. You want to?
Well, it basically means that when you have a theory, or actually a hypothesis, that hypothesis has to be both provable and falsifiable. So if you can both prove and disprove a theory, in other words, you have to have a way to actually disprove that theory.
Oh, here's what you can do to test that it doesn't actually work.
Exactly.
Okay, all right. Not a scientist, sorry.
And then another thing that's often thrown into our face is Pascal's wager.
Weekly get Pascal's wager.
Yes. Well, in a nutshell, Pascal's wager is that if all other things being equal, you should actually just believe in a God because it's a safe bet. But in that case, it's disingenuous. You're essentially trying to actually trick this omniscient being into thinking that you believe in it just because it's a safe thing to do.
Not for me to discredit an argument because of the personalities involved, but is it Blaise Pascal, I believe?
I believe so.
Yeah, kind of a big guy in computing, which is something you may guess I know a little bit about. Built a difference engine and included little errors in his design so that if somebody found the documents, it couldn't be rebuilt. And known for being a generally strange character, and an interesting personality generates an argument like that. And it seems like a safe argument in the 18th and 19th centuries. It's I'm just going to I'm going to act like there's one because what if I'm wrong, and that way I won't be set on fire or dragged through town or something like that. But in sort of our more accepting age, we can actually start having these debates. And like I said before, debate is the foundation of the society. At least we exist in the States. And if we were just to pretend that it doesn't exist because it's God exists because it's convenient, this debate couldn't happen, and we wouldn't move as forward as well as we would as a society, I feel.
Right. And then going on to the second part of what I was saying, I was going to say to finish up the first part, there are, of course, many reasons why atheists don't believe in a God. And I've just given a couple in a nutshell. But I think it's more interesting to ask why or how do believers explain our existence? Because if there is incontrovertible evidence for the existence of a God, then there should be no atheists around. And for me, it's often presented as a case that we're not open-minded, but we're also arrogant, which is interesting because Christians claim that they are humble, but how humble is it to claim that a God created a universe just for you and is intensely concerned about your well-being and eternal soul? So, but again, going back to the thing about being open-minded, we're often accused of not being open-minded.
Right.
And I think it sort of presents a conundrum because on the one hand, you want to be certain about your beliefs, but and then on the other...
There's sort of an operational definition that open-minded is willing to accept any definition regardless of the evidence. And to me, open-minded is willing to consider other people's ideas. And somebody comes up to me and says, I'd like you to think about this potentially hypothetical, potentially real situation. And to me, open-minded is okay, yeah, I'll listen. Well, let's hear it and let's go. But then that's when that ends. I then have to, if they want me to consider this as a real hypothesis, as something that exists in reality, I have to test it with what I already know and what I've already experienced, or the evidence that I have.
Right.
And there's sort of the evidence and falsifiability, and as you were talking before, and that's not really open-mindedness. That's the critical thought, which is something we also prize in this society.
Well, and of course, for me, I was actually raised a Catholic, so in order to have converted to atheism, I had to be open-minded about this. I had to consider all the evidence and weigh it carefully, and for me, the evidence just came up short. I could not justify a belief in a God. So, moving on here, I think also for the Christian to accept the existence of atheists, one of the difficulties for them is the fact that we don't believe in an afterlife. For us, we freely accept that death is the end of our existence.
Well, some more freely than others. I mean, you have to wrestle with it a little bit. I mean, Mark Twain, I believe it was Mark Twain, that said something about this, that I was dead for thousands of years before I was born and never noticed, so I probably won't notice again. For me, and we got a question about this, and we're actually planning on doing a whole show about this, is death and atheism and stuff like that. For me, the thing that scares me isn't so much my own death, because it's going to end, and then there's nothing to consider after that point, but it's losing others and stuff like that. And I think that's where religion really comes in, is having to contend with somebody you care about not being around anymore. And that's difficult.
Right. Well, and as I was saying, the fact that we're not, I think there's a certain amount of doubt that comes in to our beliefs when we think that we're not really sure that the people that we've lost through death are actually in heaven right now. We have significant doubts about that.
Yeah, okay, I can see that.
But especially to have atheists around.
That's not really our debate. I'm not saying everybody's friends are in hell. I'm saying something entirely different. I mean, it's an end of suffering, but it's a completely different kind of end of suffering.
Well, and I've of course met Christians who maintain that for them it's very upsetting to think that people like Hitler are not in hell right now, eternally suffering for what they did. It's very difficult for them to accept that they're just dead. They no longer exist. For
me, it really would be more convenient if I just didn't have to worry about him anymore. He's gone, never coming back, nothing to worry about, nothing to consider, just off our radar. Seems like a really good idea. And while we're talking about evidence, they have incontrovertible evidence of their God. Well, some of them do, and speak as such. But have you ever run into those folks? There's a reason we're doing this topic, is that something I get pretty frequently is I have a question with somebody, and or I have a debate with somebody, and they ask me a question, and I tell them I'm an atheist, and they say, well, I don't believe in atheists. That seems like a weird thing to say. You have to go, hi.
So they're basically saying we don't actually exist.
I'm solid, I'm a person, I'm an atheist. And is this part of what's leading into our topic here, or have you encountered that?
Definitely. I've actually heard someone say that they do not believe atheists exist.
When you tell them you're an atheist, how do they respond?
Well, they typically they say that show me evidence that God doesn't exist. So they actually try to turn it back on us to explain how it is that God doesn't exist. And the problem there is that as a person putting forth the hypothesis, in this case like the God hypothesis, it's up to them to give the evidence, to provide evidence for the existence of a God.
And this is kind of where I guess open-mindedness kind of comes back into this. Is if they bring us scientific evidence, then we're going to have to consider it.
Right. But at that point, it becomes natural.
But at that point, it ceases being supernatural and becomes natural. And then I really like that, and that's something that a lot of people seem to forget, is that natural versus supernatural are constantly changing definitions as our understanding of what constitutes natural increases. And the way you do that is through the scientific method and evidence. It's not by having Sylvia Browne come to your casino.